managers here for CASA of Central Virginia, and I also currently do the training classes. So a lot of you guys, we've sort of been in this virtual format before. But also, I want to go ahead and introduce our panelists, but just to let folks know, we are recording and we'll make this available to you afterwards. You are welcome to put your questions in the chat as the training goes on. We're not so much going to unmute and ask questions live, just because, again, we have a lot of info to get through, but I'll try and either address your questions in the chat on the spot, or we'll try and integrate them into the conversation. Because of the range of professionals that we have cases in common, that we also have a judge with us, we absolutely do not want to get into case detail specifics. And also we want to guard our children's and our family's stories, because remember, we are recording and this may be posted on our website. So we want to guard the confidentiality of our families and our children. And as we get started, if everyone will put themselves on mute, and then also if everyone will go ahead and put their videos, turn their videos off, except for our panelists, that will allow us to optimize video, focusing on the panelists. Okay, so why don't we start with our panelists, and I'll let you guys introduce yourselves, tell us who you work for or your organization, what your role in a case would be, and how do you in your role or organization define or assess the best interest of the child. And I know that's a really big question, but I'll just go in order of my screen. Katie, let's start with you.
It says Catherine on there, but everybody calls me Katie. Sorry. So I am one of the assistant city attorneys for the city of Lynchburg, and that means that I'm responsible for bringing abuse and neglect cases before the court. That starts at the initial, when the report gets made to DSS, they call me and ask me if they think I have enough to even take it to court. I previously did serve as a guardian ad litem for several years, and even before that, I was a CASA when I was in law school. So I have been in this world for a little bit of time, and I guess from the best interest perspective, part of my job is ensuring that social services is following the law. And so that is where we start with figuring out what is in the best interest for a child. And so that begins with the Code of Virginia, section 20-124.3. List out the different factors that go into making a best interest determination. But to summarize it, kind of what the general policy would be, we want a home that is safe and stable and permanent for a child. And we want something that is going to provide the least amount of trauma for a child. Sometimes that's with their biological family, sometimes that's not with their biological family. So that's just one of those things that we are looking at. When I say safe, what I mean is free from any sort of risk of abuse or neglect in the future. We would be also looking at the Code of Virginia again for the definition of what is abuse and neglect, that sort of thing, whether it is emotional or physical or whatever extent that might be. So I think I answered your questions. Is there anything I left out there?
Yeah, no, that was great. And that is really helpful. That was a great overview. Mary Chamberlain, next up.
I had myself muted. Sorry. Hi, everybody. I'm Mary Chamberlain. I'm an attorney. I'm in private practice with Sanzone and Baker, and I've been in practice for 5 years, and I've been a GAL for a little, I want to say it's been 2.5 years now. I'm mostly in Lynchburg J&D Court for as a GAL, and then all around the district as an attorney. I, much like Catherine, follow the same code sections and statutes she does as far as what's in the best interest of the child, and make recommendations to the court based off what, my investigation and what my judgment is in the best interest of the child. And sometimes I agree with Catherine and sometimes I don't, but we do use the same code sections. So I'm looking forward to being here tonight.
Awesome. Okay, thank you. Brandy, you are showing next on my screen.
Sorry, Jordan needed to come in. I'm Brandy Stennett. I'm with Action Family Services. I'm actually a licensed professional counselor. Typically, when I'm tasked to work with a family on a foster care case, it's to provide parenting skills education and to provide counseling service to one or both of the parents that are involved, to work with the foster parents, and other collateral contacts with the family. For me, determining like the best interest of children, when I get involved, it's because there's a return home goal. And so kind of like what Catherine said, I'm tasked with seeing if the parents are able to rectify what brought the children into care and be able to provide emotional, physical safety and stability.
Can I hear you?
Thank you. That is helpful as well. Okay, and Judge Bennett, I think you are next on my screen.
So I'm Jeff Bennett. If people ask what I do, I tell them I work in the court system. If I get pressed on that, I will admit to being sort of a lawyer. And if they really take it all the way, I will finally admit that I am a district court judge. I sit primarily in Amherst County. Been on the bench since 2015. I do a few days a month in Campbell County as well. They apparently thought I was doing at least an acceptable job in Richmond because they just recently gave me a second term, and our terms are 6 years in length. So 15 to 21 was the first term, and then that reset in July. So I'm now at the very beginning of my second term on the bench. In addition to Amherst and Campbell, we also switch around a little bit. The district that I'm in can also include Lynchburg, Bedford, and Nelson. So I occasionally make my way to those courts. Very happy to hear the attorneys, starting with Katie, say that, you know, best interest is statutory. And that's what I use. And that's my judicial philosophy is, you know, the legislature writes the law, they give me the guidelines, and I'm here to interpret that and to follow it. In a foster care case, you know, I guess really the first question is what necessitated the child being in foster care? Has that been remedied? Can the child be returned home, or can the goal be met at this time? Broadly speaking, you know, where is the child physically, emotionally, educationally, mental health needs, where are they? Narrowing that down to the statute, yeah, Ms. Thomas referenced 124.3, which is the custody and visitation statute, but that sets out basically 10 factors that you look at very specifically when you're figuring out best interest. So all of those 10 factors go into the mix. And the best part about those 10 factors is the last one in the list, number 10, basically says whatever factors the court deems necessary and proper. So it gives us parameters, but it also gives us wide discretion. In the foster care cases, we are also looking at, you know, the abuse and neglect statute was referenced quite often. These cases come in as abuse and neglect matters. So you're looking very specifically at the definition of abuse and neglect. Have those issues been remedied? And are we in a position to place the child back into either the home or into an alternative environment where all the child's needs are going to be met? And I'm confident that this is, at least right now, the safe and appropriate thing to do for the child.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. And we may ask you in a minute to elaborate further on those 10 factors as to the best interest. That would be interesting to hear more about.
Sure.
For now, April Watson.
Hello, my name is April Watson. I'm the Deputy Director for Lynchburg Human Services, but I've also been foster care supervisor, foster care social worker, all of those fun things for many years. And I've definitely it's been nice to see the growth along the way and how things have changed over the last 10 plus years. We'll leave it at 10. So a lot of what we do is our big focus is safety, permanency, well-being. Is this child safe? What is going to be the permanent outcome for this child? The last thing we ever want to do is have a child move from place to place. Kids deserve to know where they're going to grow up. They deserve to know where they're going to spend their birthdays and the holidays and who's going to be there with them for that. And so that's really important. And then their well-being. Are we meeting their mental health needs, their physical needs, their housing needs? Are we meeting everything across the board? And so a lot of what we focus on, and really every contact and every home visit and every discussion, really those things should be at the forefront of our mind: safety, permanency, well-being. And so how does that impact how we approach reunification? It should be an ongoing process. And those things should be a part of the conversation along the way, the entire life of the case. We are tasked with looking at the situation, why this child came into care, what services are appropriate and reasonable for this family, what is going to help them remedy whatever brought that child into care. And then also at the same time, what we talk about concurrent planning is, if this child can't return to their parents, what is the next best place for them? Often, ideally, that is going to be family. We work, I know, really hard here in Lynchburg, and Virginia as well as a whole was really focused on becoming a kin first culture. And so it is important that we are looking at family immediately, maybe even before they come into care. CPS might have an idea of a really appropriate family. And so we're going to try to tackle that and notify those individuals immediately. Sometimes we're able to make a placement with family immediately. The state is really loosening up, not loosening up, the standards stay the same, but there are more waivers and things available for us to place with family much sooner versus a typical foster family. And so really, ideally we are bringing in family to maybe to be a connection for those children, but also to place children with throughout the life of the case. And so then we are kind of looking at parents, and we're referring to people like Brandy for parenting, counseling, psychological evaluations, substance abuse treatment, whatever the needs are of that particular family. We should be referring them to those services, following up on a regular basis, making sure they're getting what they need. And then also, if more things are coming out, we're discussing those things. We're having very candid conversations, very frank, sometimes hard conversations, and really addressing those needs. It should be collaborative. It should be a team. It shouldn't be DSS saying do A, B, and C. We should be, hopefully you all have gotten to participate in family partnership meetings, at some part of your CASA journey, and really just incorporating the family and giving them a voice in this as well, because truly they do know their family situation better than we do. And that is a shift that has been nice to see over the years as well. It's not perfect. It doesn't work every single time, but ideally in a perfect world, that's kind of how these things would go. And then, I'm sure you'll hear us tonight talk about like the hierarchy of goals and things like that. And really our first goal is always reunification. We want kids to be able to go back to their birth parents or, whoever their former custodian was. If that's not an option, we say relative adoption or relative custody. And then third, it would be adoption by foster family if those first two things are not available. So that's kind of little foster care gist there.
Nice. And I cannot wait to dig into more of several things that you talked about there, including how we bring family in throughout the foster care journey. So yeah, look forward to talking about those things too. And last, and y'all let me know if there are any panelists that didn't get introduced yet, but last we have Chloe Edwards. And this is part of why we love having virtual trainings too, is because we can bring in people even from outside our specific locality. And I'm excited to have Chloe because you can also bring sort of that macro and policy and data perspective as well to when we talk about best practices. So Chloe, yeah, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hey everyone, my name is Chloe Edwards. I'm with Voices for Virginia's Children. I'd say I bring a really unique perspective to this conversation. I'm not our foster care policy analyst in particular. Allison Gilbreth could not make it. But I have previously worked in the foster care field. I used to be the director of Connecting Hearts. I'm also a kinship foster care alum myself and have lived experience in navigating the child welfare system. I am once a youth served by court-appointed special advocates, and I also am a court-appointed special advocate for Henrico CASA, same organization that served me. And then lastly, at Voices, I work on our Racial Truth and Reconciliation Virginia campaign. So in particular, you'll find me more so talking about macro concepts of trauma-informed care, equity, and social justice. And then I'm specialized in our public health policy, which integrates a wide variety of perspectives. Our mission is championing public policies to improving the lives of Virginia's children and really looking at that whole child perspective. But for Racial Truth, we aim to empower the voices and experiences of marginalized communities and acknowledgement of truth to promote healing, reconciliation, and justice. So with all of that being said, when it comes to looking to approaches to family reunification, I would say it starts much sooner than that. We're really looking at preventing and really looking at family preservation and really acknowledging how our systems can often fail families. We're looking at trends and really having data-informed perspectives of, yes, Black children are overrepresented in foster care, and perhaps there are systemic inequities that play a role in that, and biases in our child welfare system in the way that we see who qualifies to be a foster care family, the grace that we have or the lack thereof with families, and just looking at other historical injustices such as the temporary assistance needy families, the child family cap, different biases and policies that really contribute to the disproportionate outcomes that we're seeing within our systems. So often hear equity as a buzzword and how we need to redistribute resources. And I think that's very valid. That's a mitigative approach to policy. To assess the need of families rather than equality when it comes to resources. But then I also think we need to look at justice and eliminate the barriers that our systems produces so that all can innately be equal. So that in particular is what I would view as the best interest of families.
Awesome. Yes. Yes. And I love, Chloe, again, how you're approaching it from several different angles, both the policy and sort of that macro and data, and that you also have the lived experience that can, very directly inform as we think about best practices and what is best going to serve youth and families. So I look forward to digging into several aspects of what you were talking about too. But let's kind of start. So, again, we talked about the fact that we have people from multiple localities, and we know that localities, courts can have different personalities, different preferences, but as multiple panelists mentioned, it comes back to code and policy. Perfect or imperfect, like we know that we have to work with what we've got in the moment. So Judge Bennett, if you'll start us out, you mentioned 10 factors that the court is sort of laid out to consider. I think you said that's in more generalized like custody visitation cases. Can that also apply to foster care cases? And what are those 10 factors that the court is specifically charged with considering?
Sure. Those are the factors. The statute that they actually show up in says these are the factors that the court should be looking at for the purposes of determining custody or visitation arrangements. So generally, anytime we have a custody or visitation issue between parents, this is the guideline. And obviously that, a foster care case at the end of the day is essentially a custody case. So you look to these same parameters and a lot of, obviously they all go to the best interest of the child. I'm actually going to grab the statute because I'm not even going to attempt to get, I could probably get 3 or 4 of them off the top of my head. So number 1, the age and physical and mental condition of the child, giving consideration to the child's changing developmental needs. Number 2, the age and physical and mental condition of each parent. Number 3, the relationship existing between each parent and child, giving due consideration to the positive involvement with the child's life, and the parent's ability to accurately assess and meet the emotional, intellectual, and physical needs of the child. Number 4, the needs of the child, giving consideration to other important relationships of the child, including but not limited to siblings, peers, and extended family members. So there at number 4, you already see, in addition to the parents, you're getting the siblings, the peers, the extended family. Number 5, the role that each parent has played and will play in the future in the upbringing and care of the child. Number 6, the propensity of each parent to actively support the child's contact and relationship with the other parent, including whether or not a parent is unreasonably denying the other access to or visitation with the child. Number 7, the willingness and demonstrated ability of each parent to maintain a close and continuing relationship with the child, and the ability of each parent to cooperate in and resolve disputes regarding matters affecting the child. Number 8, the reasonable preference of the child. If the court deems the child to be of reasonable intelligence, understanding, age, and experience to express such a preference. Number 9, any history of family abuse, sexual abuse, child abuse, or violence, force, or threat. And then finally, number 10, the one that I referred to earlier is the catch-all. That just says such other factors as the court deems necessary and proper to the determination. So you can tell from the language in those that they're really set out. They're talking about the relationship primarily between two parents and a child. But you go back to that statute constantly when you're looking at other relatives, other petitioners for custody. And that is just a fantastic guideline to give you a set list of stuff you can look at as a starting point.
Yes, and that's helpful. And it's interesting to hear those laid out because, as you said, it relates specifically in the code to custody visitation, but I feel like that is also potentially a helpful list in thinking also about potential placement with parents or family members, because some of these things, for example, when placing with relatives, this is something that I sort of very consciously weigh out in my mind, their ability to maintain contact or to navigate, arbitrate contact between the parents and nurture those relationships, et cetera.
Right.
So those are helpful things to think about.
Yeah, and these factors, I mean, they apply whether you're talking about mom and dad or a grandparent or a sibling or an aunt or a family friend. Anybody that the court says anybody with a legitimate interest can petition for the child's custody, or the law says any person with a legitimate interest. So yeah, I mean, you just substitute in those relations to the terms of the statute, but basically anytime you're looking at custody, these are the, yeah, that's your framework.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And would it be correct, so kind of surveying all the panelists here, would it be correct to say that the law as well as DSS policy do start with the base assumption that a child can best be nurtured in, one, a family, as opposed to like an institutional setting or system, and B, a child is best nurtured in their own family if at all possible? Can we say that yes, the law or policy make that assumption? And really, whoever wants to chime in can. Judge Bennett, you looked like you were having a thought. So I don't know, did you want to chime in and we'll kind of go from there?
There is a section, hang on.
True judge behavior here. We always see y'all flipping to statutes when you're on the bench.
Read the code. That's rule number 1. Always read the code. And yes, it's built right into the section of the Virginia Code that controls the J&D Court. Our main volume of code is 16.1. And there is a section in 16.1 that basically sets out the answer to the question that you're asking. And the answer in short is that yes, public policy in Virginia is that it's the parents first, and then it's the family, and it's the relatives, and then the broader community. But here we go. The section I'm looking at, 16.1.227, purpose and intent, where the legislature basically sets out the entire purpose of 16.1. In one of the sections of that particular code, to separate a child from parents, guardian, legal custodian, or other person in loco parentis only when the child's welfare is in danger. So yeah, I mean, you start with the presumption that that you don't remove a child from the parent unless you basically have a situation where the child is in danger, and that's where that sort of lays out the policy right there from the get-go for the sections of law that we deal with.
Okay. And April, would it be correct to say that DSS policy sort of makes that same assumption? And also, I mean, what data or information do we have to even come to that conclusion or to build that policy as supporting best practice.
Yes, yeah, our policy, our guidance, they all indicate that children do best when raised in a family, but also their birth family. And I think a lot of some of the outcomes we see that children that come into foster care and enter kinship care they have a lifelong connection to family. They're more likely to be placed with siblings. They're more likely to be placed in their school of origin, so not switching schools. They are more likely to be, they'll have fewer placement moves in foster care. They're more likely to have a successful reunification. When they are able to return home, ideally that family unit has created, maybe strengthened some relationships, or so there's additional supports available. And then they also have a connection to their identity and a cultural connection. So those are just a few things. But also, so in we've been collecting data in Lynchburg over the last, I don't know, since about 2016. And some of the numbers we found just from the kids that we've been working with are 62% of the kids in Lynchburg that have been placed with relatives have never moved to a different foster home. So that placement stability. 96% of kids in Lynchburg that have been placed with kin exit foster care to permanency outcomes. And then 98% of those do not age out of foster care in Lynchburg. So we can see right there, like those outcomes are significant because we know that when kids do age out of foster care or without a lifelong connection, some of those outcomes are dire. And so we can just see right there, we know that kids are happier, they feel more comfortable, they don't want to move. And so we can see firsthand the difference. There's also kind of this piece that like nobody's going to love you like your aunt or your grandma, but also they're not going to give up on you either. So, a lot of times the work is harder for them because, they're dealing with family dynamics. Like I am a foster parent for my sister's child now. She can't come to Thanksgiving dinner. This is awkward. So there's those family pieces that are difficult and hard sometimes to navigate. And so sometimes they need a lot more support, but ultimately the children do much better. They know that grandma's going to love me forever. She's going to stick by me. She's going to work through this. And that is just one less trauma that they have to worry about. So we've seen kind of firsthand some of those great outcomes, and hopefully that's continuing to spread throughout the state as well.
Gosh, that is so great, but it's also very impactful to hear the data that you've collected and what those outcomes are. And especially that's significant because we know Virginia leads the nation as far as youth aging out of foster care. So the fact that especially our older youth who are placed with kin, that really provides that lifelong support for them that we know they don't get when they are in foster care and then age out. So yeah, that's amazing. And then Chloe or Brandy, did either of y'all have anything you wanted to add about either like any data that we have around supporting the idea that a child's flourishing is kind of rooted in kind of keeping them with their family of origin, if at all possible? And if not, that's okay, because I know we have some questions later on for both of you. Okay, so let's go ahead and move forward. So let's talk about, sometimes I think that there is this concept of in a foster care case that a child's rights or best interest is sort of in competition, direct competition with a parent's rights or best interest. I'm curious if any of our legal folks want to respond to that idea. And then also I would love for some of our legal folks to speak to what rights does a parent retain even when their child is in foster care? Mary,
at odds with one another. I think that part of the struggle is you want to protect that child and not subject them to abuse and neglect or risk of abuse and neglect in the future. And the whole reason why the Virginia Code is set up the way that it is so that there is a due process for those parents to protect their constitutional rights. So they have a certain length of time. Most of our cases, the parents get at minimum 6 months in order to prove themselves before we're going to take any action that is drastic towards their overarching parental rights. Most of the time in Lynchburg, it's going to be at least 12 months or even 18 months really before we will seek termination of those rights if the parents are truly trying to remedy the situation, if they're making marked progress. Now, if a parent's completely disengaged at that 6-month mark, once they've had no contact, we will seek termination of parental rights. But that's not after us putting forth lots of effort to get the parents to engage in that sort of thing. And so if a parent is truly seeking to protect their own parental rights and engaging in the process, engaging in the services, they're going to get at least to a second permanency in which they've gotten over a year's worth of services and an attorney to help them through the process as well. I know here in Lynchburg, attorneys are appointed even before the first hearing. And so oftentimes the parents won't meet that attorney until that first hearing, but that is somebody that they can go to for legal advice throughout the entire life of the case, if they feel that their rights are being violated or whatever the case may be. But there is definitely a fine line between, do we have progress with the parent in order to safely return the child home and let the parent retain their rights, versus not letting a child linger in foster care forever. Because that is one thing that case law is pretty clear about, is that children should not linger in foster care. And so there is a deadline for how long parents have to get their act together.
Well, and I can say that I'm also in Lynchburg on the court appointed list to represent parents in DSS cases. And there is certainly a perception, at least for them, and a lot of these people are not familiar with the child dependency court system, that DSS is working against them and sabotaging whatever, it's a conspiracy. It's the system. I hear that phrase a lot, the system. I always try to advise my clients from the very first day at that 5-day hearing, the first time I meet them, that it really isn't like that. The way that you work these cases and the way that you win these cases is by collaborating with DSS. And that may not be 100% the right word, but get them what they need, get them the information about relatives. It's very helpful when things transition from CPS investigation to CPS foster care, because they do get a new contact person they feel like isn't trying to get them in trouble as much. But I always, and I'm clear with them on, the statute for both abuse, neglect, and then eventually termination of parental rights, where if you've done what you're supposed to do and your social worker likes you and you've demonstrated your improvements and you caring about your kids, court is going to go so much easier. So, as far as like their rights and things like that, do you have custody of your child right now? No, but you can still be going to visits. And Lynchburg DSS is really good about getting visits set up as soon as children come into care. You can still be in the loop on things like doctor's appointments, issues with the school, if there's, IEPs or things like that, making sure there's no gaps in medication, if the kids are on medication. So there's little things they can do to feel included, even from the inception of a DSS case. And that's always the way I advise my clients to do that anyway. And I find that they tend to go much easier. And again, it also helps, I think Lynchburg DSS, and correct me if I'm wrong, April or Catherine, but aren't like 52% of Lynchburg DSS kids with a kinship placement?
It's more like between 35 and 40%, but it's with the way our numbers come out, it's almost like 60 kids. Yeah, that
makes it go so much easier for parents when they're with a relative. That makes them feel like they've got some buy-in to, like, okay, so maybe the system isn't against me, and you can start sort of chipping away at this notion that there is a conflict between the children's rights and what's in the best interest of the child and the parents' right. So that's just my philosophy.
Yeah, and
I think from a CASA perspective, for CASA advocates to encourage parents to participate and utilize their rights in the areas they have them, as far as attending the doctor's appointments and attending IEP meetings and school, whatever they can. If they're doing what they need to do and aren't disruptive, they should be attending these things. And that is evidence that will help support the fact that they can take over that role once they get their child returned to them.
Yes. And April, I would love to hear you speak to that a little bit, because I would say it took me a long time, like even after I came on staff, it maybe even was a couple of years before I realized, oh, parents do still have the right and or they should be included in medical appointments or have the right still to sit at the table and educate for their child educationally, things like that, even when the child is in foster care. And like Mary and Catherine said, these are things that can be evidence towards a parent's ability to meet their child's needs. And also too, I think we probably a lot of us have experienced, if we do sort of keep that information hidden from parents, a lot of times it can be really difficult. There can be a mismatch between what the parent reports that they were seeing of the child's behavior at home prior to removal and what the foster parents or DSS is reporting that they're seeing of the child now. So helping to make sure that we're on the same page as far as the child's functioning and what's driving some of those behaviors can be really helpful. So April, can you talk a little bit, again, in terms of best practice, what should participation and information sharing look like with a parent in a case? And also, since we know that CASA is not the one to do that information sharing, how can we advocate for parents or even family members, maybe who are petitioning for custody, to be brought back into the loop?
Yep, those are all great questions and thoughts. Yeah, a parent absolutely can be involved in those pieces. Go into well child checkups. A parent has the right and actually is the only person that's supposed to be signing an IEP still. Unless parental rights are terminated, the birth parent should be at an IEP meeting. They should be signing the IEP. They should absolutely, and sometimes schools get tricked up on that piece as well. And they'll just say, well, do I need to invite the birth parent? I'm like, well, yeah, you do, and they're like, well, can you find them? I'm like, I can try to find them, but it is still your responsibility to work with that birth parent. And they should be involved in that IEP process. I think it makes so much sense, especially if a child has special needs or medical needs. The parent should be a part of that process the entire time, assuming they're safe and appropriate. And, most of the time they are. And those, they can manage a doctor's appointment and be totally fine. If a child's getting infant and toddler services through infant and toddler connection, like occupational therapy, physical therapy, things like that, a birth parent, if we're working on reunification, a birth parent should be involved, working on those exercising, knowing what those exercises, knowing what the plan is for that child. It's really important that they stay in tune to those things. And that, like, as you said, that shows their commitment, that shows that they're understanding what's going on, but also it helps to lead to a more successful reunification in the long run. The more access the parent has to their child throughout this process, the better the outcomes are going to be. And also, that's another kind of plug for kinship, because if the child is placed with kinship, more often than not, kinship are more comfortable allowing the birth parent to come to that. Or, hey, we're having physical therapy at my house this afternoon, stop by, or come to dinner on Sunday night, those types of things. So that often improves that access, that birth parent's access to their child as well. I think a way that CASA, I can't talk today, sorry, I've had too much water. Another way that CASA can advocate too is reminding birth parents of those things. Even asking the worker, sometimes, it's not an excuse. It's just the reality that, everybody here is overworked and there are probably not enough workers for the amount of cases that we have. So, sometimes things happen. So, sometimes as a CASA advocate and say, hey, mom, have you thought about going to this appointment? Hey, worker, can mom come to the doctor's appointments? Hey, I'm free. I can go with mom to this appointment too. Or, sometimes we have the service providers like Brandy and other service providers. Sometimes they'll go to appointments and coach the parent through, explain to the parent what this means, or, hey, did you understand that? Are you comfortable with this? Or how can we make this easier for you? So really giving them the support to participate in those things as well. Did I answer that? I feel like I kind of jumped around, but I think really, the birth parent is the birth parent unless parental rights are terminated. And so they can go and request medical records. They can have access to all those things, unless there's some kind of order or stipulation saying that they cannot.
Yes. And April, a question came up in the chat. So for example, if a child has a medical procedure, let's say they're considering putting tubes in the child's ears, is the biological parent involved in that decision making?
Yeah, best practice for us would be that the birth parent is involved. Ultimately, we're the custodian, so we are usually signing off on like authorizations and things, but one of the things we try to do in Lynchburg is also get the birth parent to sign as well, showing their agreement. If they are in agreement, we talk to them about it. If it's something that they're not comfortable with, we try to educate them. That's another reason why it's so important to have them at the medical appointments, because you want them to have that information. Is this a medically necessary surgery? Is it something, but also too, sometimes we look at those cultural pieces, or is there a religious purpose for this decision if a parent's not comfortable with something? And so trying to be safe, we have run into the immunizations piece over the years, where a birth parent is not comfortable giving their child immunizations. And so allowing them to come to doctor's appointments, seeing why that might be beneficial, allowing them to ask questions, and then ultimately, hoping that they'll be able to make that decision. And then, sometimes depending on the circumstances of the case, we may not move forward with that, depending on that. So if it's a surgery that's medically necessary or whatnot, and the birth parent does not agree, ultimately, we will have to make that decision one way or the other as an agency, as the custodian. However, it's important to us that the birth parent is in agreement and understands and is not opposed to that. So we try, really everything should be talkable. We should talk about this. We should hopefully be able to agree on it at some point. And I can't really ever recall many instances where we weren't in agreement and a birth parent wasn't concerned about those things. And it certainly helps to have them involved in that process, allowing them, if their child's having surgery, they want to be in the lobby. They want to see their child when they get out of surgery. They want to, talk to their child on the phone or whatnot. They want a text or something knowing that things are going well. And that's perfectly appropriate and fair. As a parent, I would absolutely be crazy if I didn't know those things. So you can imagine how they feel. Whatever circumstance got them here, like there's no doubt that our birth parents love their children very much. Yeah.
And Brandy, was there anything that you wanted to add to that from the parent coach perspective? Because the other thing I'll throw out there as well, and that I think is really helpful because you work with multiple different localities, Brandy. So I will definitely say, so actually, I think it was Campbell County that first kind of introduced me to this concept that no, even though a child is in foster care, right, the parents absolutely still have the right to be updated on the child's medical condition and confer with medical professionals, advocate for the child educationally, etc. And I think it's also worth mentioning that even if it is not typical at some agencies or, with different workers or their knowledge level, even if it's not typical to integrate parents in, that does not mean that it is against policy or that it is not best practice. So again, I think this is where CASA can come in as well, and we can advocate first with the worker and say, hey, is there a specific reason why mom can't or shouldn't come to medical appointments? Or if based on how mom is presenting in other meetings, or would it be helpful to have the parent coach there, or can they sort of practice and pre-plan for the appointment? So yeah, anything that you want to add on that, Brandy?
I've got several different thoughts with it. Certainly in Campbell County, I have done that a lot more than with Lynchburg. That is because as a provider, it's more of about the number of hours that are approved or the type of service. So it looks a little bit different depending, like you said, on the locality. I think involvement in medical appointments, the school, all of those things are very important. It helps the children with decrease in anxiety a lot of times. Where I'm really waiting for our area to get a little more progressive, because we tend to be a little bit behind the trends. More of the trends now with foster care have to do with more of a co-parenting perspective, where the foster or kinship parent is doing a lot more modeling. There's a lot more integration. There's a lot more phone contacts that happen with the kids throughout the week, not just including on visit day, which is usually more helpful for the parents and their involvement. And so when it comes to introducing the idea of the biological family going to these appointments, it's not so much of a hoopla that has to go on with it, because it's not the first time that they're seeing each other at a medical appointment. So I do think that since I've started working with foster care, and it's been close to 20 years now, to see that things have gotten a lot more integration between the biological family and the foster family, or the biological family and now the kinship. And that's been great. I am hoping that our trends continue to change so that there is a lot more of the involvement between the two, because ultimately that helps the kids with decreasing anxiety. They're not having to choose loyalty between the biological family versus the foster family. It helps with transitions. It helps with behaviors. Children do a lot less acting out or acting in. You know, the acting out behaviors that we see are the hitting walls and the cussing everybody out, and the acting in with the depressive symptoms, the eating disorders, the things that they're trying to control. So those lessen when there can be that integration.
Gosh, yeah, that is so helpful to hear as well, the direct impact on the child. And again, you know, like you were saying, Brandy, if we are working towards a reunification goal, whether that's return home to the parents or with a family member, then again, making sure that there's that very visible bridge building between the two is going to be so good for the child and supportive when it is time for them to start transitioning back to their family. And also to I've seen positive cases, not that it has to happen, it's completely at the family's discretion, but where the child has transitioned home, and because of really good bridge building, the foster family has kind of stayed a long-term support for that family. You do not get that if the foster family is very actively opposing return home or reunification and making that very publicly known. So, yep.
I will add one more thing. I think that COVID has had both positive and negative effects when it does come to the involvement with either the school appointments or with medical appointments. You know, in the negative way, it's usually limited to only, those appointments are limited to one adult being there, whether that's either has to be the foster parent or it has to be the biological parent. Where that has been positive is I've worked with a lot of agencies who have been more willing to integrate phone contacts or Zooms or some alternate way to be involved in appointments. And so I think it's also helping the medical community to be able to understand a little bit more about foster care and the best interest of the child, with everyone working together for them, the children seeing that, which helps children dispel fantasy myths about the biological family versus the foster family. So I will say that I think COVID has had both positive and negative impacts when it comes to that. Yes, both may not be able to go to appointments, but I've seen a lot of the agencies like infant and toddler be a lot more creative with being able to include the biological family through the Zooms and things like that.
Completely agreed. COVID in a lot of ways has shown us what is possible, and
yes,
we shouldn't throw away those tools in our toolkit the more we go back to in-person. We need to, the more tools, the better. Okay, so let's expand a little bit. We're talking about how we can incorporate parents sort of into the foster care case while kids are still in foster care, but let's also talk about the family aspect. So, you know, kind of the way that I express it, you know, we know that we work on return home. Adoption is the option of last resort. We want to make sure that we have options in between the two as well. We want to make sure that we have family options within the wings. April, can you talk to us a little bit about, from the DSS perspective, how do you guys go about incorporating family into the foster care process or case? And yeah, that'll be the first question. Then I have a follow-up question for you after that.
All right. Ideally, we should be doing it from the very beginning. Some of our guidance and policy mandates that we immediately notify relatives. Within 30 days, we should have done relative searches, mailed tons of letters, made phone calls, also talked to birth parents about family supports, who is appropriate, anyone they would identify for us, as well as talking to the child or youth about appropriate supports. I keep saying appropriate, but just family supports. Who is important to you? Who shows up to your birthday party? Who do you spend the night with? And, you know, who in your family is a special person? That can also be fictive kin. That can be people that are not related to you by blood or marriage, but people that are important to you, like your godparent or your neighbor or that babysits you, things of that nature. So really, we should be listening to the family as to who's important. We can get a lot of that really good information at a family partnership meeting sometimes, but also in meeting individually with the birth parents and the children. Sometimes other family members, we can find the family historian, the person who knows everybody and can tell you who so-and-so is and who would be a good person, but really just collaborating with relatives. We also have a requirement to notify, when a child comes into foster care, to notify the custodian of any siblings. So whether that's adoptive parents, foster parents, other birth parents, if children have half siblings, things of that nature. And so really just letting as many people know as possible, like, this is the situation, there's this child, how can you be a support to them? And then just letting them know there are different ways to be involved. You can, you could be a placement. You could also be a connection. You could be a relative that does respite. You could pick the child up every other weekend. You can come to visits with them. You can mail them birthday cards. What does that look like for you? What can you do? Sometimes we have relatives that say, I can't do this full time, but I can definitely be a support. I can provide transportation. And so just really trying to find a way to incorporate them so that child has as much family as possible. And it could look very different for every family. Yeah. And sometimes, you know, that support is especially important when we have a kinship placement, because it's a little bit harder. You know, foster parents come to foster care to help their community, whereas kinship foster parents come because their family's in crisis and they need something right now. And so it just looks a little bit different on the path to how they got here. And so those supports, sometimes the need is a little more intense sometimes. Does that answer your question? Okay.
Yes, it does. And can you speak a little bit? So we know that we have some cases sometimes where maybe a parent is hesitant about sharing information about their family network. They may be estranged from members of their family, etc. So, and sometimes I think that there is this concept that exists where perhaps there's the idea, well, okay, my contacting an aunt or an uncle that I found through other means is dependent on the parents giving me permission. So for example, if the parent says, no, I don't want you to contact my mom or my sister, or does DSS have to abide by those wishes? Or would you say, I mean, what are the family's or the child's rights in that moment as well?
Yeah, I'm not an attorney, so I don't have the code section. I could find it if I needed to, or some kind of policy, but it's all there somewhere. But no, we are obligated to find and notify relatives. And so we can absolutely do that. Now, granted, some of the information we share we might not share everything, you know, but what we would do is we have a pretty generic kind of script or letter where we just say, like, a child, it's come to our attention that you may be related to a child, so it's such and such. And, you know, we'd like to talk to you and get a little bit more information. So yes, we absolutely can. And it, even at the point where it becomes where there's a potential for this child to be removed and come into foster care, at that point, you can also disclose information to a relative. And so if a birth parent's saying, no, I don't want you to tell anybody, we do not have to adhere to that. Now, granted, we should also protect some of their confidentiality in certain aspects, but ultimately, it is in the best interest of the child to have a family placement, most likely, most of the time. And so if we kind of fall on that, we're usually okay. Yeah, we should notify family no matter what. And then we do have tools too, as well as clear, accurate, certain search functions, things that we have access to tools that can find relatives based on the birth parents' information as well. And we have access to those through the state.
Yes.
The court orders were actually recently updated and have a line on there.
Yes.
That the judge can actually order the parents to provide that information about their family. So that's another helpful tool as well.
Yes. And I'm so glad you mentioned that, because I was thinking about that. I feel like, and I'm curious to hear from other legal folks, I feel like I'm not really seeing that box utilized at this point. Maybe it's one of those habit forming things that we just need to get in the habit. Judge Bennett, have you been using that checkbox at all? And I'm really curious if you guys have had a case where you've seen that checked. Does it seem to yield better results from the parents?
It's new enough that I cannot speak to whether or not it is producing any results. I will tell you that every case I've had since the form has been updated, yes, I check the box. And I order the parents to, to disclose that information, because at the end of the day, yeah, it's in the child's best interest. The relatives that are disclosed, that may not ultimately be a viable placement, but it is absolutely in the child's best interest at this stage of the proceeding for the department to have the option to look at all of those people and to at least do a cursory investigation. Are they viable? Are they interested? Can they step up? So yeah, I'm checking the box every time it's there. And at this point, I can't give you any feedback on whether it's made a difference, but it's, that's certainly the hope.
Yeah, and that's a great advocacy point for us to be aware of. At what stage of the foster care case is that order? Is it like at the 5-day hearing, adjudication, dispo?
I think, are you talking about those new boxes that say shall?
Uh-huh.
Yeah, I think they've put those into all of the early orders, meaning probably the emergency removal, the preliminary removal. Yeah, I think they're in all of anything that involves removal of the child from the home in those initial stages. I'm certain they're in those orders.
Okay, that's great to know. Yeah, and it's a useful thing for our advocates to know. I can think of multiple cases that I've had where at some point, maybe, I don't know, 3, 4, 6 months in, a family member becomes aware for the first time that the child is in foster care because the parent has actually been actively concealing that information due to embarrassment or whatever. So I just strongly encourage CASA volunteers, use all your resources available to you, speak to other family members, speak to parents. Sometimes, depending on the age of the child, ask them about who has been important in their life and in their world. Get as much contact information as you can, and once you have a phone number, call it. Do not ever simply rely on other people's reporting, whether that's a family member's or DSS, about what this family member wants or they do or don't want to be involved. Call, make direct contact. And Judge Bennett, would you say, from your perspective in reading the court reports, in our CASA of Central Virginia formatting for our court templates, we have a relatives and other interested party section. I try and teach our volunteers, make sure that we are trying to give a thorough outline of the family network. You don't want to exclude people. You still want to give enough information to be able to know what threads you can pull moving forward, walking out of that hearing, or who maybe can be quickly eliminated due to a particular barrier crime or something like that. Would you say, is that a helpful understanding of the relatives and other interested parties to make sure that the reader has a clear understanding of the family network?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Perfect. Any other info that you really like to see in that section?
What I have always said in relation to the information that I get from CASA is one of the reasons that I consider the CASA report so valuable is because it gives me a lot of information, and it gives me current information. And when I'm the only person in the room that does not have any ability to walk out of the door and do my own investigation, I am completely dependent on what CASA and the attorneys and the witnesses and the GAL, what you guys bring into the courtroom. That's all I get. And if I have to make a decision on what should be a permanent placement for what is in this child's best interests, I want every single scrap of information I can get. And all of that goes into the calculus. However unimportant it may seem, you may be giving me one sentence that nobody else in the case has caught or picked up on. There may be one name or one nugget of information in a CASA report somewhere that the whole case could turn on. And yeah, the relative identification is a big deal. It is. It's heartbreaking to get to the end of a case. You're at your second permanency planning hearing and you've exhausted all your resources and you're out of time. And then all of a sudden, here's this relative you know, judge, somebody just came and filed for custody 2 weeks ago, you know, and you're beating yourself up going, where was, you know, if we had had this information a year ago, this would be a whole different case. So yeah, I like the way it's set out. I like the way that the reports are formatted, and the more information, good, bad, or ugly, that I get, the better my decision is going to be with that additional input.
Perfect. So let's shift to talking a little bit about our sort of 3 permanency goals in a row. So first of all, trainees, CASA volunteers, you should remember that our permanency goals go in order of return home, relative placement, adoption. I think we've talked a little bit about why that may be. Does anyone else want to add any more about why it's in that specific order?
So I kind of want to modify it a little bit. Our policies kind of shifted a little bit when it comes to relative placement and adoption. We want permanency for these children. We don't want parents that have not gotten their act together after, 16 months or whatever the case, 17 months, to continually harass the individuals that are caring for the children. And they do that a lot of times by petitioning for custody on a consistent basis. Now, even though the law requires there to be a material change in circumstances for them to get custody back, if a parent hasn't gotten their act together during the life of a foster care case, and you have relatives that are willing to adopt, we are putting that as a higher preference over a relative getting custody. And so I would say that the order is really return home, relative adoption, relative custody, foster care adoption. And that's just because we do prefer them to be with family if possible over, a stranger. But we also want permanency for these children, and we don't want the caregivers for these children to get worn out caring for them because the parents are constantly harassing them and abusing the legal system, things of that sort. And at each situation, I guess it kind of just depends upon who the different players are. But it's not always that custody is preferred to adoption. In fact, we usually would prefer adoption over custody, especially with the advent of the kinship foster care, where we can now place these children in their relatives' homes and provide them with the support and funding and resources of foster care.
Right. Yeah, that is such a good point. And Judge Bennett, did you want to respond to Katie's comment there at all? Because I will say, I think we have localities that think very differently on these topics. Lynchburg is much more friendly to the idea of adoption by relatives, where I think a lot of our other localities have the idea that no, the only way we get to adoption as an option is if we have ruled out placement with relatives or reunification with the parents. So don't want to get too deep in the weeds on that, but I don't know, Judge Bennett, do you have any, what are your thoughts on that piece?
I don't know that that's something I've seen very much of at all.
Relative adoption, you mean?
Yeah, I mean, at least in the county, it's, it tends to be a custody placement with a relative. There certainly have been cases that end in a relative adoption, but it sounds like there's just a much higher volume of that in Lynchburg. It's just not something that I've seen much of here.
Yes.
And to a corollary to that, thankfully, I don't have the volume of foster care work in the county that they do in Lynchburg, and that's a good thing. The less kids I have in care, great. But that's not a situation where I see that as a viable option come through all that often.
Yes, and it is worth noting, granted, because of some policy changes, things are changing a little bit now, but certainly previously also part of what makes adoption by relatives helpful as opposed to custody by a relative is because of the ongoing adoption subsidy and other supports that are available for those who adopt. And again, keep in mind, a lot of our families are closer to the poverty line than our foster parents. So again, past policy, it's just a very clear-cut disparity, inequity that foster to adopt parents are eligible for that ongoing monthly subsidy until the child turns 18, whereas family members did not get in the past any type of subsidy. The other thing I will note, and while, you know, talking about kinship placements during adoption wasn't one of our specific questions, I do think it ties in so clearly to the best interests of the child. I think that relative adoption is also closely linked to if there has been a kinship placement, has the child been in a kinship placement during the life of the foster care case? Again, I think Lynchburg is kind of sailing ahead with kinship placements. And again, our surrounding counties, I think Bedford also is definitely on that train, but I think some of our surrounding localities, we're still working to catch up to that idea. So those are things to think about as well. But also, can we talk a little bit about when we're talking about our permanency goals of return home, relative placement, adoption? Sometimes there's this concept that at a permanency hearing, what we're going to do is put the parents, any petitioners, and foster parents all side by side and figure out who is the best home and then decide placement of the child based on that. Can someone speak to that concept and whether that is legally supported?
I mean, I don't think this is one of my pet peeves, and you know this, Christy. To me, the foster parents are sort of not parties. And I know there's been cases in other localities where they've had foster parents file for custody and stuff. Those are obviously very separate. That's weird. That's not something that I've personally encountered. I know that it happens. But for me, I think that particularly as GAL, you know, it's not really an even playing field. In light of the termination of parental rights statute 16.1283 and in light of 20-124.3, you know, we're looking truly at what is in the best interest. I mean, looking really hard at the parents. And if, you know, there's some cases that are not, you know, that are not close at all, the parent can't get it together on the timeline. So we have to look at custody or placement. And, you know, if that doesn't work out, then you look at adoption. But I don't look at it personally as a GAL or as an attorney for a parent. I don't look at it in terms of the foster parents even being involved. I mean, foster parents are, with the exception of kinship, you know, that's a little bit different, but sort of the stranger foster parents are people who are paid to be in their role. They have very nice houses. They have a lot of resources that biological families just don't have. But the connection, and you know, Brandy, of course, can speak on this as well. The connection that a child has to their parents and to their family is so much more important to a child than having their own bedroom in a nice house in the suburbs of Forest, you know, or something like that. It's just not, from my perspective, it's just not comparable to say that they're on, you know, it's sort of look at this versus this versus this. Adoption in and of itself can be a really great thing for kids. It does give permanency and things like that. But from my perspective, that's sort of a stranger, again, I don't want to use the word stranger, but a non-relative adoption is just exactly that, what it is. It does. I realize the child's been there for a long time. I realize the child has a bond to the foster family and in some, you know, or in most cases, depending on how long they've been there, but it's not, to me, that's sort of the last ditch effort more than it is an equal playing field.
Absolutely. Yeah. Any other legal friends want to comment on that? Legally speaking, is permanency achieved by putting foster parents side by side with the biological parents and determining who is the better home, or what is the legal process we have to go through to even consider adoption as an option?
I'll say that because we always start with return home as our initial goal, we're not putting them side by side because our preference is going to be return home. And so because it has that preference, that means that we're going to evaluate that before we go to the next step. We're not going to put them all side by side, because if you're looking at like, oh, all these people can love the child, all these people can provide for the child, oh, but this person makes more money, that just wouldn't be fair. And that's discrediting their culture and heritage and their birth family that they have ties to. And I don't know what the exact statistics are, but there are statistics out there that I heard once upon a time that children that are even adopted outside of their family tend to go back and look for their birth family. And so if we can maintain those connections in some way, shape, or form, that is going to benefit the child in the long run. I think also, I had a thought and then it slipped my mind. There was something else I had. I'll come back to it if I have it again.
Got it. And maybe this would be a good time to talk about, and Catherine, just to make sure that I have correctly understood. So you are saying that legally speaking, we have to consider the permanency goals in the order that they are given by the statute. So return home is first preference. If that cannot be achieved, relative placement. And if those two cannot be achieved, adoption. So in order to even get to the other options, then we have to rule out return home as an option. So if I've correctly understood that.
Yes, and I would say one component of that is that we have to provide or attempt to provide some level of services to these parents. We can't just say, oh, good luck on your own, get your act together. Like, we have to make a concerted effort to provide them with whatever resources we can to rehabilitate them and see if reunification is possible. And it doesn't say that we have to do every possible thing out there. It does say reasonable efforts. And so some people do think that we need to, pay for their stay at Club Med while they detox. And we're not going to be able to do that, but we will provide whatever resources we can, whether that's coming from the state or locally, to help those parents. And we do have quite a few resources here that are expanding with local churches that are also helping parents get connected to resources. And that's one of the things that CASA is usually pretty great at, is helping advocate for parents when they need a resource and connecting them to those sorts of things. The thing that I had thought of before that had slipped my mind that I wanted to go back to was, we discourage strongly foster parents from petitioning for custody. If we find out that a foster parent is petitioning for custody, we will consider not using them as a foster parent again in the future, because they need to understand their role in this process is not to get children for themselves. The role in this process is to see if parents have the ability to get their children back. And if not, then adoption hopefully is an option with them if we can't reunite them with family and that sort of thing. But family first really is the policy in Virginia, and that is what we very strongly advocate at Lynchburg Department of Social Services.
Okay. And maybe would now, oh yes.
Can I chime in really quick? Because this one I'm definitely passionate about, and it's not looking at it from a legal perspective, but I think it's so important for this specific training for CASA workers, because I can imagine coming in as a CASA worker, like when I first got into the field, and like I've heard some others say when they first got in the field, and if you're making a report that's going directly to the judge, the input is extremely important. And if we are looking at a foster home versus a biological home, there are often differences right from the beginning. And I think it's very difficult to step back and look and see what is best for children. And Mary, and I have this conversation quite often, very passionate conversations often when it comes to this.
We do.
It's, what are we measuring children's success by? And if it is looking at neighborhood safety, if it is looking at, socioeconomically, if it's looking at access to extracurricular activities, then often, not always, but often the foster home is going to automatically look like a better fit for the child. But that, for me, is not how I measure success. And so when I'm working with the family or working with children, for myself, what I find is such a large measure of success is how children navigate relationships in the future. They may make better grades in their foster home, and they may not do that as well academically in their biological home, but have they been able to resolve things with their relationships? Have they seen mom be in a domestic violence relationship and resolve that? And I believe that that's what future relationships, future life is based on, is how we navigate relationships. That impacts our jobs, that impacts our, relationships with significant others. And so if we are able to help parents resolve, even though they may not live in the safest neighborhood, even if they don't have the same access to children do in extracurricular activities, resolving relationships is so incredibly important for the rest of their lives. So I'm definitely passionate about that. And Mary, I know that you and I have this conversation very often, because I think it's easy for, not picking on CASA workers, but the CASA worker to come in and they're looking at these two different homes, and it's easy to make an assumption that children are going to be more successful, and they will in a lot of ways in a foster home, because of the stability, because of the support. Academically, they may do better. Behaviorally, they may do better. But it's something that we're not necessarily measuring in the resolve of relationships. And that impacts them for the rest of their lives. So if we can take the time to look at that more instead of looking at those things on the surface, I think that it is easier to get behind the return home goal. And I know it's difficult. And I know my perspective has changed over the last 20 years of working through this and seeing how foster care has changed.
Yes. Oh, Brandy, that's such a good point. And I kind of put it in the chat as a post-it note, because I'll be thinking about that for a while, about measuring the child's success by how they navigate relationships and resolve relationships. And I want to make sure we put a post-it note beside, because I want to come back, because you have been a big proponent in multiple of the cases that we have worked together, where even if a case is, we know, heading for termination of parental rights and adoption, you have been a big advocate for making sure that we are therapeutically getting in there and working on that relationship between the parent and child. Because even if adoption happens, if that relationship is unresolved and there remains that wound in that relationship, that is something that that child, as well as that parent, is going to be carrying for the rest of their life. And the more that we can do to therapeutically resolve that, the better. So let's make sure that we circle back to that, because I definitely want to dig in there. But going back to the concept of the permanency goals, Judge Bennett, or really any of our legal friends, do one of you guys want to touch on what is the legal bar that has to be met for a child to return home? And what factors are we to consider?
You mean by agreement? When you take it to the judge and the judge has to rule?
Yes, in court, legally speaking, for the judge to make their decision. Yeah.
So realistically, I'm hesitant to be the first person to speak on this, but realistically, the way I've seen that happen is DSS files for termination of parental rights, which of course they're obligated to do. Someone correct me on this, but if it's 18 out of the last 22 months, the child's been in care. And they file for the termination of parental rights, and then they can't meet the standards set out by 16.1283 to terminate the parental rights, that the judge finds that there haven't been reasonable efforts, or that, the parent has gotten clean and things like that. And then everyone's in kind of a tough spot at that point, because it's either the kids go home or they go home with a protective order or things like that, but it's not the outcome that DSS was looking for. So it's kind of scary. Is it 15? Thank you, Catherine. 15 out of 22 months, they have to file the termination petitions. So really where you see that happen is the really close cases where a parent has gotten clean. Maybe they've had one or two relapses throughout a case, and it just depends on the way the evidence comes out. I've seen cases where the kids have gone home because the worker, the way the evidence came out in court is that the foster care worker, didn't do certain things, and the parents were able to make improvements and no one recognized them or things like that. So that I'll let Judge Bennett and Catherine, who are much probably more educated on the DSS side of it than I am, weigh in on that. But the way I see it go down is that they file for the termination of parental rights in the courts involuntary, and then they can't meet the standard, and then you have kind of a difficult situation on your hands.
I would say the number one thing is have the parents remedy the situation that led to or resulted in the children being in foster care. And it's led to or the continuation of, because sometimes the issue that brought the kid into foster care might be that the house was dirty and they've cleaned the house, but that's not the reason the kids stayed in foster care. The reason they stayed in foster care is we found out that the parents have a drug problem and they haven't fixed that situation. I think that the way we evaluate that, not just is the specific situation factors that led to and resulted in the kid being in foster care, but also do the parents have the ability to protect their children from future abuse or neglect or risk of abuse or neglect. If you have a parent that is, still engaging in a relationship that's very volatile with domestic violence, then they haven't recognize what they need to do to protect that child from future abuse or neglect. Or maybe they don't have adequate housing that can provide shelter for the child, despite the numerous resources that were given to them. It really is kind of just like there's this part of it and that part of it and then another, but I think Mary is correct in saying that ultimately, do we have evidence to terminate the parent's rights? Sometimes is our default analysis, but the initial one is, have the parents met the goals that they've agreed upon in the foster care plans? That's also part of the termination statute. If a parent has agreed that they're gonna, leave this abusive guy and they haven't done it yet, what is preventing them from doing it? And if they're not making those efforts, then they're not going to get more time, and then that's what's going to lead to the termination of parental rights.
And I guess
but if they are making progress, then the question is, have they gotten themselves to a place where they can protect that child from future abuse and neglect? And if so, then hopefully we're doing trial home placements and we're trying to return home as quickly as possible.
And they have different different subsections of the code they can terminate under, and that always changes things too. The most common one is has the parent been unwilling or unable to remedy, the situations that brought the child into care. So that is, much more of a contested issue than 6 months no contact, because you will have cases where DSS terminates and there's not a question the parent has had contact with the child in 6 months. So that's a little bit separate. But yes, depending on which code section they proceed under, but the unwilling or unable to remedy the situations that brought the child into care is almost always the big sticking point, I would say. Oh, well, sometimes they do it by agreement, though. That's really nice when everyone does what they're supposed to do. And GAL and CASA, we have family partnership meetings, and everyone decides we're returning the child home. Child's home on a trial home placement, and all we have to do is go to court and have the judge, sign off on the end of the case. Those are my favorites, but that's rare.
Yes, those anticlimactic hearings are the ones where a lot of prep work has been done on the front end to allow that court hearing to be anticlimactic. Yeah,
those are also my favorites. It is a wonderful thing to come into the courtroom and have the department and CASA and the GAL all on the same page that, this is what needs to happen. It's when you get three completely different opinions on the right resolution that it really becomes challenging. I agree with Ms. Chamberlain. There's a whole bunch of different statutory factors you use for termination, but the one that the majority of cases come down to is that the parents, without good cause, have been unwilling or unable to remedy the situation that brought the child into care. And that's a hard thing when you get to the end of the time and you've got parents that are clearly making progress or are making an effort. That's a very difficult thing to deal with, but there's also, there's plenty of case law, and that case law we know is supported by statistical evidence that it's not in the best interest of a child to spend a lengthy period of time waiting to find out when or if a parent is going to be ready to resume those responsibilities. So those are the really hard cases, is when you get that subjective you have to make a subjective determination at the end of it, whether or not they've come as far as they need to within a set period of time.
So it sounds like, from what everyone is saying, certainly when thinking about return home, safety is a really big thing that everyone is thinking about. In the moment, safety and ability to meet the child's very basic needs, roof over their head, appropriate clothing, getting them to medical appointments, but also the ability to prevent future abuse or neglect or to keep it from recurring. Does that feel accurate to people? I'm seeing nods. Okay.
Absolutely do not want a child having to come back into foster care after we've sent them home. And so we would rather keep a child in foster care a little bit longer initially to ensure that that home is stable enough that they're not going to have to come back in a month or two because the parent didn't really have their act together. And so we don't want to see those repeat numbers. There are some localities that I know are much more quickly to put children back in their home, and they have more of those repeat numbers. But we really want stability and permanency for children in addition to just basic safety.
So April and Brandy, let's talk a little bit about reunification efforts, because as Sharon Harris, when she does our DSS trainings for our CASAs, as she says, sometimes we have to prove something doesn't work. We have to try it out before we know it's failed. So sometimes with reunification efforts, we need to have data one way or another, but also sometimes where it's difficult in that process is some of those reunification efforts like visitation or trial home placement. Sometimes they can challenge the child, right? If a child is having after effects from visitation, or sometimes in those cases where the parent is meeting all the criteria we're asking them to meet, but there are still concerns about, can they truly protect the child? Can they meet the needs? Let's talk a little bit about what we need to do, what data we need to gather in those cases to truly get the evidence we need for court one way or another to say whether the child can return home or whether we need to move to another placement. So what is some of the data we need to gather, and how may that play out in terms of casework that we might see? And April or Brandy, either one, y'all can start.
I can start from like a DSS.
It was a race to unmute.
Yeah. That's always a tough one because we want kids to be safe. We want to work that, it's one of those things where, sometimes it can be a little scary because ultimately you never know what's going to happen unless you try. And if a parent has been making progress and they've been working their services and they really too can verbalize like their own progress and how things have changed, those are helpful indicators, I believe. If we're at the end and a parent is still denying something significant, like that's a cause for concern if they can never get past those issues throughout the life of a case. So a lot of times what we do is, oftentimes visitation starts out, sometimes at the agency supervised, depending on how quickly things progress in terms of services and the parents' involvement and engagement in those services. Sometimes, visits will transition out into the community. Sometimes they'll start at like a therapist's office instead, take them outside of our DSS office, which can also be a trigger for kids as well. This is, sometimes the place they come to after they're removed. It's not always a happy place to be. So, we have a partnership with Amazement Square. They're wonderful. Sometimes our kids will go do visits there. And so slowly in small pieces, we kind of look to see, all right, can the parent contain this child here? Are they meeting the child's needs? And so really just trying to do it in a way that kind of trying to observe and get some kind of observations in an environment that maybe is like natural or organic in some ways, because we know a visitation room in a sterile office is not a real place, but also moving those visits home. And so starting off supervised, watching them, and then slowly giving, okay, the child's going to come for 2 hours, then we'll pick them back up. How did the child do afterwards? It's not unreasonable, or it's actually normal for a child to really struggle with that transition. Someone mentioned earlier those divided loyalties, and that's a very real thing. They love their foster family or their kinship family. They love their birth family. And those are significant changes, and they're scary. And so it is important to see how a child reacts and responds to, but also we should be prepping and mentoring and coaching that foster family or kinship family into how to prepare for those. Hey, you get to go see your mom today. This is what you're going to do. And having that, really the best case scenario is when that foster family or kinship family can partner with the birth family to set those visits up for success. So watching how they do in those settings, and then ultimately, it might be a weekend visit. It might be start with an overnighter and then a weekend visit. And then maybe the child's spending a couple nights a week there. And the parent is dropping them off at school and making appointments and still continuing to stay clean or sober or whatever their need may be. And so really just, has the parent been able to pass, pass drug screens throughout the life of the case? So just things like that, what have they done to show that they are being successful, that they can maintain, and then slowly introducing the child back into their life in a way that does not overwhelm them, in a way that they have supports. Because, if your child's been gone for 6+ months, that's going to be an adjustment for the child and for you. And your child's grown and changed in some ways. Coming into foster care, no matter the reason, is a traumatic move anyway, even if it was warranted and more than appropriate. So those are just kind of some of those pieces. Brandy, I'll let you talk.
Yeah, well, I agree with April. It's the, starting small, visits at DSS, more structure, being able to move in the community. You're assessing with the increased time or the different setting, the parents' abilities and how they're improving on their abilities to, whether that's manage behaviors, be emotionally supportive, whatever has kind of been lacking. I think, and this may be a little bit off track from what you've asked, but I'm trying to kind of think in everything that I say that this training is for CASA workers. And so I think it is imperative for CASA workers to understand that just because a child acts out after a visitation does not mean that the parent has done something to them directly or indirectly. While as a mental health professional, I want to continue to educate people when it comes to mental health and be an advocate. At the same time, once certain issues become more mainstream, they're often misused. So just because a child acts out after a visit does not mean it's trauma. And trauma is the popular word currently, the trend of what we're talking about. And there's been many waves throughout the years that I've been a mental health professional where there's been the different trends. When I first started, every child had ADHD, and then we've been through the different trends, and trauma is currently the trend of what's being discussed. I think it is amazing that we're talking about it, and that we're becoming more trauma informed. At the same time, I think sometimes you can be so inundated, you think you see it everywhere. And so just because a child acts out after a visitation does not mean that it's trauma. It can be a child wanting to be back home, and going back to the foster home is difficult. So I think it's important to note the behaviors, but also to have people who are involved who are not misreading the behaviors, who can kind of dissect and see what's going on and how to resolve it. Just because a visit doesn't go well doesn't mean we stop them. And I think that for several years, we were quick to want to stop visitations because a child acted out. And I think the more educated that we are getting, the more understanding that we're becoming of children in foster care and the impact and the studies that we're doing with children who've aged out of foster care, there's more of an understanding that acting out does not equate with bad and children shouldn't go home. That means we as the professionals have more work to do so that return home can hopefully be a successful goal. So when I'm working with a parent, it's not a checklist measure that I can do to say that it's being successful and we can continue to go, but it is staffing with professionals, working with outpatient therapists for children, hoping that providers in the community become more aware of foster care and not just equating acting out with meaning it's related to the biological parents and we need to stop it.
Yeah, and Brandy, can you talk about that, since you as the parent coach often are observing these visits in your capacity, and also a lot of times you're consulting with DSS, where if the visits are very difficult, you will probably be giving input for DSS to make the decision, okay, do we need to pause visits maybe like for 2 weeks or something to get the child a chance to regulate? Or yeah, can you speak a little bit about how is that decision made? What's being considered?
So personally, I have in 20 years, less than a handful of times ever advocated to stop a visitation. I think that when I have been involved with those situations, it's usually been an outpatient therapist who is getting reports that are sometimes not purposefully, but skewed, whether it's by the foster parent and only being able to report what they're directly seeing. I think that in my experience, that has changed dramatically in the last 5 years, I would say, if I had to put a number to it, where the visitations aren't just being stopped because one person has said it needs to. It's more collaborative, where I think we're doing a much better job of meeting together, and whether that's through the family partnership meetings that are happening, or whether it's through strong casework by the social workers who are getting everyone together to staff cases. I don't see that being done as often. I'm not going to say it never happens and it's never a reason to stop visits. Where I advocate on the other end of that is we need to get the parent and child involved together in therapy. That this is got created together. The problems, we need to try to help them resolve that. Whether that ultimately means return home or not, we need to take advantage of having a parent who is willing to be involved in services to help that child on a journey of healing while they're willing to be involved. Even if that means we ultimately land at termination, the more that we can involve the parents in that process, the more it helps that child ultimately.
Yes. Yeah. And can you talk a little bit more about that piece? Because again, I know that we've had cases together where really there was, the word magical might seem inaccurate, but it really is amazing how powerful the parent participating in repair work, facilitated repair work with that child can be. So sometimes that may look like a parent participating in a therapist facilitated apology session to the child, where the parent acknowledges harm or abuse that occurred, takes ownership of that, etc. Yeah, is there anything else that you would like us to think about there, or how can we as CASA be advocating there? Certainly from something that you just said, it sounds like we would want to advocate for kind of that team decision making or team input, where we aren't relying only on the outpatient therapist who is most likely doing fabulous work with the child, but also depending on where their information came from. If it came solely from DSS report or foster parent report, again, they may not be getting all aspects. So really having some balanced decision making with input from the parent coach as well is helpful. I feel like I hear you saying.
Yes. So I guess what I hear you asking is, I think it is easy to look at these cases from the outside and see the importance of separating the parents over here and doing their work and the children over here and doing their work. And maybe we can bring those together if reunification is possible. I look at it very differently. A parent who can acknowledge that something occurred and take some level of accountability, even if they're not fully there, can be such an advantage to a child's healing. I've not met any parents in foster care to this point, aside from maybe a truancy case, but children who are in foster care that didn't come in because of abuse or neglect. And so if you initially look at the case and decide abuse and neglect, how can children go home? Then we're not going to get very far. But if we look at it and say there's a parent who will take some level of accountability, or at least acknowledge. For a child and a parent to take a parallel journey leads to their healing, a child's healing so much more. So even in the work, if I'm working just with the parent and not working with the child, I tell the parent that the greatest gift that they can give their children, regardless if they can come home or not, is to be healthy. And if they can participate in services that will help the child's journey also in healing. The analogy that I tried to give is, you know, have you ever had unresolved issues with somebody who passed away? It's really difficult to get past that. You don't have the other person to be able to talk about it, banter, you know, be able to get past that. Well, never being able to resolve with your parent through the process is kind of like a depth where there is no resolution. Whereas if we can take advantage of the parent being involved and taking the journey with the child and acknowledging things along the way, they will be able to heal more easily than they could with that absence, and not ever being able to resolve some of that grief, because it is like a grief process.
That is such a good point. And something you said there about the greatest gift that a parent can give a child is their own healing. And a lot of times what I find myself telling parents, again, when we're near the end of a case, even a case that may be ending in termination of parental rights and adoption, because it is becoming so much more common for contact to continue between a child's family of origin, even if they are adopted by their foster family. So often, the amount of healing that a parent is able to access via their services and the level of healing that they can get to is potentially going to directly relate to the level of contact that they potentially are able to have with their child after adoption, because that may relate to how comfortable the adoptive family feels with allowing access. But also, again, you know, if that relationship post-adoption remains very traumatic between the child and parent, then again, you know, we're probably going to look towards trying to limit the contact between the parent and child. So April and Chloe as well, because again, probably from the zoomed out perspective, and Brandy, any of you guys, why are we moving towards continuing contact post-adoption with families of origin? Why is that the best practice that we're moving to? And what information or data do we have to encourage us that direction to say that's a good idea?
I'll jump in because I haven't had a chance to chime in. I don't offer a legal perspective, just a policy one and personal one. But I mean, what I haven't seen represented here is the deep layers that exist before we even get to the opportunity for reunification. Like when we talk about truth and reconciliation and healing and justice, like there are these systems, and you know, everyone's playing their part, but we all have a role that we play in the system. And what I've seen is it's important to look at our role in that part in a very intersectional and broadened perspective way. So yes, for CASA, as you're going into the household, you're going to deliver your reports with a neutral perspective. And we know that according to policy, yes, what's best for children, well, first is family-based preservation, but, you know, secondly, if it supersedes that point, it is reunification with the birth family. But what's not represented here is just those deep layers that go into that. So it's like, yes, we want parent involvement, but do they have transportation? Are they a frontline worker? Are they working at Shoney's, one of my first jobs, where, you know, you got this shift and you can't go into the courthouse because you're going to lose your job. And then if you lose your job, you're not going to have the salary to contribute to reunification. And so, you know, there is that, yes, push for parent engagement, but there's these underlying long cumulative problems that begin occurring and accumulating over 400 years ago. There's deeper issues like generational wealth, food security, food deserts, the closest that we have to really cash assistance is temporary assistance for needy families. And so it's very much important to look at those underlying perspectives, because it's that ideology that, yes, if this family solves their problem, then work hard and get your child back. But at the same time, some of these problems are very much systematic, and the system expects parents to be involved in counseling and parent education classes, many of which my mother was involved in. Some of it does come at a cost if you're not on, Medicaid or other benefits. And then if you do have a job, you're going to seek a benefit cliff and likely lose services. And so there's very much deeply complex issues that play a role in it. And we can't just look at it, with our part. We have to very much advocate to transform the systems. And I remember doing my part when I worked in the system, and that's what encouraged me to go into advocacy. But for many public professionals, it also comes at that, unfortunately, you can't represent DSS or whatever system you're representing and publicly lobby. So I just wanted to add that very much an important perspective. I think in my personal situation, I obviously wanted reunification with my birth family, but my father was incarcerated. He was on child support. We were on child support, which was very limited. I was a triplet. Child support was very limited, but we also had to choose between putting him on child support and the other benefits we didn't qualify for. For my mother, she had to seek mental health services, wasn't on Medicaid, couldn't afford it. We were kinship, we weren't getting foster care resources. And so I don't want that perspective to be left out of the conversation. I hear a lot of passion, but it's just complex issues that we still have to work towards and transform, which some of what Family First is getting to, but policy too is incremental.
Absolutely. And Chloe, can you talk a little bit to, I know you and I had emailed about a place where we quite often is the hinge point, where we sort of feel this tension between, well, the child, we're now almost 11 months or more into a foster care timeline. The child has formed this warm, nurturing relationship with their foster family as we want them to. And now we're looking at transitioning the child back to their family of origin. And a lot of times that is a tension point where we really start to think about the cost benefit analysis, or what is the harm to the child if we take them out of this home and then put them back in that one. But for one, after you and I emailed about it, I realized a lot of times the cases where I see that happening, that tension being felt, is when the child is very, very young, like an infant or very young child. I don't see that as much with older children, like teenagers. In general, we don't see a lot of cases where more than one family is fighting over a teen. That is quite unfortunate. But again, a lot of times it's babies or very young children. So Chloe, in the work that you did I think it was an adoption agency, right? Before you came to Voices, it was an adoption, or was it foster agency?
Yeah, adopt agency. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Yeah. So what trends do you feel like you saw there? And also even just what we know with our kids that are disproportionately represented in our foster care system, why is working towards family reunification in and of itself a justice and equity act?
Well, first, I got to give, your localities their kudos, because the data that you all are pointing to is very significant. That's just, it's not that positive everywhere. So certainly you all are doing something innovative, prioritizing kinship care and family-based placement, and family-based placement in general is successful. But when I was working in the foster care field, there was this unrealistic ideology, which I'm sure CASAs, y'all bump into this, that we want the babies, we want to preserve we want to be able to contribute into their characteristics, and we want them to still be innocent before we get them. And unfortunately, that's just not the reality of children with terminated parental rights that are foster to adopt. And so there's this unrealistic expectation. People want to be foster parents. They want the young children, but realistically, people with children with TPR are not your young children. And so I bumped into that all the time. They can go to a private agency and pay, I don't know what it is now, what, $3,000 for your home study, and do do an international adoption or private adoption, but oftentimes people don't want to pay that price. And so very much these families with these ideologies and the intention to adopt do enter the system. And I have been in that. I've been as a child welfare professional, and during that time, I've had been in those conversations where they're telling me about how they're fighting the birth family, and comparing some of the standards you all were comparing. Well, we have this to offer versus that. And I don't want us to ignore that part of the system, because it very much exists. Not only does it exist within the system, but it exists within our foster families, et cetera. And so when families are saying the system is failing me, it's not necessarily personal, but we have to recognize that these injustices occur at the individual, interpersonal, institutional, and systemic level, and look at the way it shows up in real world examples. Look at the way it presents itself, because it very much exists, and that's why people aren't coming to DSS before they get to the displacement outside of their families. And so, so that very much exists. I also think, trauma-informed care, I know what one of the other professionals were saying, but there's just this lack of resources, especially with our kinship parents, who don't get resources at all. In my case, my parents didn't get any, my kinship parents didn't get any resources. But then foster parents not really knowing how does trauma show up. And there's children that have issues, they have triggers and that show up in different forms. They have abuses that show up in different forms. I don't need to recount the stories for you all, but it exists, and these parents are not prepared to deal with those triggers either. Training is not enough to solve when a child is starting a fire in your household, and then they got to think of, I'm signing up for this long term. So those are just the real issues. And so we do need more trauma training. I like it that, Families First focuses on trauma prevention as well as intervention. And yes, I can speak from personal experience. When you're doing those home visits with your family, the child is very much experiencing the tension within the family, even if you're in a kinship placement within this side of the family and that side of the family. I could only imagine what it's like for a foster care placement. And those tensions externally, even as a child, they impact you individually when you're doing those visits. And when you come home from your birth family visit to go to your other visit, you're going to hear, well, how did your visit go? And it's going to be for several different reasons. It doesn't come with a handbook to navigate that. So I don't want to discount that children can be experiencing trauma when they visit, their birth families, because the tension between the sides of the family is a trauma on its own. And to navigate that as a child and still somehow decide, find a way to stay neutral. I don't want to discount that. Trauma is not a bad thing, but what we have to do is give families resources to navigate some of those dynamics, as well as recognize, yes, the child is experiencing trauma, and how could we have better prepared them for that experience?
So many good things there. Yes. And April, to go back also to part of the question that I think Chloe was addressing as well. How do we know, how did we come to the point where we are supportive of continued relationships after adoption, continued relationships with the family of origin? I think someone had commented in the chat, won't that be confusing for the child potentially? But yeah, Brandy or April, if either one of you guys want to address that.
I think what we've learned now in listening to the voices of adult adoptees and other individuals that do have those lived experiences, a lot of what we hear is, and someone else alluded to and mentioned earlier, you never stop thinking about that. Like, you don't, it's a part of who you are. And most of the time, adult adoptees want to know where they came from. They want to know their story, and they have a right to their story. They have a right to all that information. And what we've seen time and time again is these kids, if it's kept from them, it's the secret. Sometimes they create these fantasies that may or may not turn out to be. And so really kids do better when they have kids, youth, teens. They do better when they have a realistic idea of what that story is and how things got to be. Kind of when we're training and coaching foster parents, what we say is your child should never have a memory where they didn't know they were adopted. It should always be a part of their story. They should always have access to that information. And granted, it might be pieces of it, age appropriate throughout time. But ultimately, we've seen cases where a child has grown up, was adopted at 2 years old, turned 18, walked out the door of their adoptive family and never looked back ever again and went back to their birth family. And I think sometimes that ends up being a relationship that child that goes really well. And on some occasions it can be a disaster. Like the child's not prepared. It's an unhealthy relationship, but it should all be talkable. It should all be, we don't want our kids to create these fantasies, but also people change, people grow. And so there could be a family that is ready to meet that need. There are parents who make decisions, oftentimes from the best place. And so they really want, and when that child comes to them, like they are appropriate. So I'm saying several different things. I'm thinking about it from like a private stance and then also like a foster care stance, foster care adoption stance. But really, a child has a right to their story. They have a right to know who they are, where they came from, and they have, and when kids have that information, they do better. Kids don't forget their birth family. They don't forget any of that. And so especially when they come through foster care, And so what we see too is kids they have when we go back to those divided loyalties, kids, when we have foster families who ultimately adopt, when those kids have been able to have a relationship with both sets of families, their birth family and their adoptive family, they often do better. They're healthier. They have a place to go to get all those answers about like medical history and where I came from and those things. So we just oftentimes like listening to those voices, that's kind of the information we've received so far. And I'm, Chloe, you might be able to talk even more better about that than I can.
I was going to say you're right on. Like with even in kinship situations, when the home you're leaving is not supported and there's just division, whether it's family or strangers, it's just not like, it's not what is mentally best for the child. And it is going to show up in those visits with the birth family, as well as with the other placement when they return from that visit. The child often feels like they're a traitor, but then there's also concepts like cultural, your cultural heritage, your the communities you're from, your friends, your family. And so I often face in the professional field those foster parents who resisted engagement with the family. And I think that has to be much more normalized in the field, even in cases where we know TPR may happen in the best interest of the child long-term. They often will go back to their original homes, as mentioned. So that's not only trauma informed, but it also helps them heal from their past. We're not denying them an opportunity to reconcile their past and move on to the future.
Yes. And guys, I am aware of the time. I put the feedback form for tonight's training in the chat. And again, I know 2 hours is a significant commitment virtually. I'm going to sort of address some of the questions that have come up, but anybody that needs to hop off, you're more than welcome to. And like anticipated, did not get through every question. Lots of interesting things came up that would love to chase further. Especially Chloe, things that you have mentioned. And again, those experiences as, as an alum, I think is so valuable. And I want to link back to something that someone said in the chat, or a question that someone asked that relates to this idea of continuing contact with the family of origin. So especially if there has been a kinship adoption or relative custody. So one of the points for a child to be permanently placed with a relative is that they have to be able to protect from future abuse and neglect. So we know that a key prong of that is that this family member is going to be the one really the gatekeeper, managing the contact with the parent, or if the parent files for future custody. So the relative needs to be empowered and with safeguarding capabilities, but also that word enmeshed, sometimes there can be, I don't know the right word to use, alarm on the part of like system members, like, oh my goodness, what is the relationship between the family member and the parent? Well, first of all, there probably is going to be a relationship of some sort, and there may be ongoing communication because they're related, because maybe they do see each other at Thanksgiving, etc. So I guess, yeah, Chloe, what would you say, or even April, from a DSS perspective, like what would you guys say to someone who is concerned about a quote enmeshed relationship between a family member that we're looking at for placement and a parent that we're not able to return the child home to?
The most extreme example of this, but in my case, my mother decided to waive her visitation rights. Like, she didn't want a relationship. And I don't think it was holistically sincere, but I think she was dealing with those underlying traumas of losing her kids. I'd say on the other end, I had my father's relationship, and he was returning from, I think I hadn't probably seen him in 3 years of incarceration. In my case, my kinship placement happened to be my grandparents, who are in many cases foster parents, because I didn't find out they were my grandparents until I was placed with them. And so it was a very unique situation. I didn't want a relationship with my father at all. I think I was still processing the relationship with my mother, and they too were processing it. I'd say safety is key. My grandparents in that case, I was shocked when I returned home and saw my father sitting on the sofa. Like, I would have very much wanted to be prepared for something like that after not seeing him for 3 years. I think in the foster family's case, however, there's many biases that may be pre-existing considering the birth family. And we also need to set that realistic expectation that this relationship is very much important, and put that voice and choice with the child rather than the parents and the caseworker. I think, as April mentioned, I'm like, in many cases, I don't think that situation was trauma informed when I came to my placement and saw my father sitting on the sofa. But I also did need that push, and I wasn't giving counseling services when I was in kinship care to even overcome my personal trauma and situations. So I'm glad I was put in this circumstance, but I think we ultimately need to really put that voice and choice with the child to gain insight on what they're experiencing and what those family dynamics may be that may not come up in a court setting.
I think sometimes too, we see with kinship, or at least I've observed, is sometimes, it is family. And so it's going to look a little bit different. And so sometimes we expect these kinship placements to be perfect and hold them to the same standard as a regular foster care placement. And we can't do that. So they're going to slip up sometimes. They're going to mess up. And I think we have to be able to talk through that and work through that. For example, like when Chloe mentions her dad was there, and to say that might be a case that we're working with, and we say no contact with mom due to whatever reason. And then we find out that mom's been seeing the child. Instead of just jerking that child out of the home immediately, saying, you didn't listen to us, let's talk, what is that about? Let's talk through this. How is there a way to remedy this? Is there a different boundary we can put in place? Why did we say no contact? We placed the child with grandma. Maybe she is appropriate to supervise that contact. Let's look into that. I expect kinship placements to mess up, to push the boundaries. It looks different. And I think when we talk about enmeshment and things, like, it is their family. Oftentimes it is their child or their sister or whoever. These are very complex relationships and family dynamics. And often, they know one another better. And they're also working on setting boundaries. And we have to sometimes help with that, or give them the resources to set those boundaries in place. But there's also those kind of relationships too. Like, mom can you imagine how hard it would be to be a grandparent to know that your grandchildren need this help, like they need somebody, but also that your child is struggling with addiction and that they're out on the streets homeless? Like, I can't imagine those two conflicting things, you know, and so it's a hard relationship to navigate, and we have to be very delicate, I think, and give some kind of, I think, you know, just, I guess, grace, or I don't know what the word is for that, but be able to talk through those things and give extra chances, I think, as long as we can make sure the children are safe ultimately. But expect people to mess up. We're all going to mess up. We mess up.
Yeah. And like
I think
Chloe
that
had
does
talked
provide
about.
a little bit of protection, is in the permanency planning statute. There's a section that talks about certain findings that have to be made for a child to be transferred to a relative. And these actually came out of a case from Lynchburg v. Cook. And there's 4 things that the court has to find. One, that the court is willing that the court has to find that the relative is willing and qualified to receive and care for the child, willing to have a positive, continuous relationship with the child, committed to providing a permanent, suitable home for the child, and willing and has the ability to protect the child from abuse and neglect. And so if there is that enmeshment, the question is, does it interfere with those 4 factors? If it's going to affect that parent's ability or relative's ability to protect the child from abuse and neglect, then they might not be a suitable placement option. If they can put proper boundaries in place, then that's just something that kind of has to be weighed according to the statute.
Good stuff. All right, guys, thank you so much. Last panelists, are there any last words or concluding thoughts that you wanted to offer? Again, the conversation has been fascinating to me, and from some of the feedback coming in, I think it has been to others as well. Yeah, any final thoughts?
I will just affirm that generally, like more recently, kinship care has been more of a priority in the child welfare field. So just kudos to certainly the state versus regional and local data is different. And so just kudos to the locality for being progressive. I remember fighting for kinship guardianship assistance, which had 8 years before it was successful. And we were looking to localities like Lynchburg and others to serve as an example. So just good work.
Yes, absolutely. And again, CASAs who aren't serving in Lynchburg, this is, as a staff person or in Brandy's situation, this is kind of the benefit of doing some line straddling work of serving in multiple localities, because you kind of get to see best practices in each locality. And when you see it one place, you can advocate for it in another place. So CASAs that aren't in Lynchburg, just be aware, this is one way that we can be a significant help to our child's case, is to advocate for potential to equip kinship petitioners, parents. Lynchburg DSS has regular kinship training classes, so we can advocate for them to be exposed to that resource, to encourage our DSS localities to, be open to the idea of approving a family member as a foster home placement, as a kinship placement. It is possible, and the state is absolutely providing a roadmap and supports for that to happen. It's just getting people in the habit and achieving that mind shift. But again, in my experience, I don't know if this has been the case for you panelists, but for me, seeing those success stories where a child maybe was close to being put in a residential treatment center, and then once they're placed with family, it's just kind of like a in their whole spirit, they just kind of settle. So anyway, yeah. Any final thoughts from our panelists? And then I'll hang around for any questions that people want to ask, but truly I won't trap you guys any longer.
I'm just going to put a little plug out there for when we talk about, we do have a kinship navigator grant, and Lynchburg, Bedford, Appomattox, Amherst, Campbell, Nelson, we all partner together that with Patrick Henry. So CASA, that's another great way to advocate. Judge Bennett, whoever, attorneys, we offer that training, a kinship training class 3 to 5 times a year. We started out 3 times. We're now up to about 5, sometimes 6 times a year, daytime classes, nighttime classes. But that class, it's for people who want to be approved as kinship foster parents, but also kinship caregivers that need support. And there is a regional between those localities, a kinship navigator too, that I can also get that number for and send out. But that is, when you have kinship or family members that are, filing for custody or coming through to your foster care hearings and stuff, that is a great resource for them that can quickly approve them as a foster parent and meet the training requirement for foster parent approval for kinship family. So,
yep. All right. And Chloe, just a thought to be thinking about. And, I've wondered, I thought it would be so cool to have, I don't know, like if open house would be the right word, but some kind of, I don't know, like where we're able to showcase the kinship work we're doing in this locality and sort of invite state legislators in to kind of talk with some of these folks. And I think it would be really cool for some of our judges to be invited into some of that too, again, to see what's possible and where we can continue to move forward. But anyway, it'll be something to percolate on.
Yes, we'll keep you all posted on our upcoming General Assembly session priorities. I've posted some resources, including our racism in the foster care workshop, but we have a rally planned soon, and I believe we have a roundtable, but don't quote me on that, as well as a youth statewide. We're going to do a youth statewide advocacy cohort this year, combining all of our issues. So more details to come.
Awesome. All right. Thank you guys so much. Have a good evening. We'll make the video available once we